Now the story of the Jewish exiles who lost everything, and the one man who had no choice but to help them rebuild it. It's the book of Nehemiah. Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and in commemoration of an eventful day here today in the history of the program, that being the day that we turn the page officially into the book of Nehemiah after doing all the background work and Ezra and history stuff. In commemoration of that, I would like to answer a question that a lot of you have been asking me. And the question is, what are the sound effects and the music that Jeff made for this season? What's the scrapey sound and the slidey sound? What are those supposed to be? And, I know the answer to that because I asked Jeff to use them. It's a sword unsheathing and a trowel scraping, presumably scraping mortar. We gamed out what we want to do for the music on the front end of this, and I asked him if he could use those two sounds to build the rhythm out, and then he ran with it and made something that feels like Muse. The theme speaks for itself. It's really, really cool. Jeff is wildly talented and super fun. And if you haven't listened to all of his music that he's made, you should probably go listen to it and support him because he's just awesome and he makes great stuff. And the great stuff he makes just happens to be with you in mind. So that's what you're hearing there. And it's evocative of what I think is kind of the theme image for all of Nehemiah, which is the situation that Nehemiah finds himself in. We'll get to it here in just a few chapters, where he's trying to complete this multi-generational task that has run through Zerubbabel and really through Esther and Mordecai as well. I mean, if they don't do their part in the whole thing, then everybody dies and there's not much of a multi-generational task left. And then through Ezra, and then eventually through Nehemiah, this multi-generational, nearly century-long task of rebuilding the temple and then rebuilding the people. As we've discussed, this task was commissioned by God. It was commissioned by God through the prophets. It was commissioned by some of the greatest and most famousest kings of the ancient world, like Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, a little bit, and Artaxerxes a lot. But there's a reason, my friends, that the task of rebuilding the temple and rebuilding the people has taken the better part of 100 years, because it's super hard. They were nothing. They were beat down. They were gone. The land was gone. The culture was eroding. Stuff was in terrible shape when this task got started, and there's all kinds of resistance. And so, as we've discussed over the last few weeks, Ezra thought he was going back to Jerusalem to just be like, all right, let's whip things into shape and let's live by the law of God and we're ready to move forward. When he got there, he realized, whoa, we got to dig out of a hole first. We got to fix a really big problem that's going to make our neighbors probably really, really mad. It's going to make a lot of people really mad, but we just got to do it in order to get back to even a starting point from which we can build, from which we can move forward in the project of rebuilding the people. And that, of course, as we covered yesterday, is where the book of Ezra ends and hands things off to the book of Nehemiah pretty seamlessly. And in Nehemiah, some of the consequences of all of that's going to come home to roost. The neighbors are not happy about this rebuilding project, and they're especially not happy that Nehemiah is there to rebuild the walls and to cement Jerusalem and the people who live there and around there as a real, legitimate people and a presence in this part of the world. The age-old enemies of the Jews, the people who are made of the same stuff ideologically as Haman from the book of Esther, they want them gone. And now they want them gone more than ever after the intermarriage and mass divorce affair that we read about at the end of Ezra. So Nehemiah shows up and we get this one great image that I think characterizes this whole book that we have in front of us of Nehemiah and his men having to work on these walls, basically with a sword in one hand to fend off enemies who were attacking them by day and by night, and a trowel in the other hand, scraping mortar and laying bricks to get this thing built as quickly as they possibly can, knowing that their window to finalize, to complete this task of rebuilding the temple and rebuilding the people, to cement that by getting this wall physically up, their window to do that is very, very small. They have a window of favor that is tiny. They've seen those kind of windows close very quickly. They've seen the unity and motivation of the people, the attention span of the people wane and wander very quickly again and again over 3, 4, 5 generations. And so they got to move fast, but they have to do it under duress. So that's what the music that Jeff so brilliantly put together is trying to communicate. That there is a mood of tension and focus and danger and high stakes, but also that there's two very practical things that you need to do. Not get killed, that's the sword, and build this dang wall. That's the trowel. So every time you hear that music, that again, for like the 10th time, I want to thank Jeff for doing such an awesome job on, you can picture that. It's meant to set the mood for what we're talking about here moving forward. And the next thing that sets the mood for what we're talking about is a drastic setting change. We go from a place with the turn of this one page right here from the end of Ezra where we're listing off offenders we're listing off literally the names of the people who got this wrong and put the whole project to rebuild the temple and rebuild the people in jeopardy. We have mass grieving, but also mass unity and agreement of what the problem is and what needs to be done. It is a very difficult, very tenuous situation. Hundreds, what are we at? Over 1,000 miles away from clear back east, where we open in Nehemiah, with a scene taking place in the super cushy throne room of, once again, Susa. Now, you'll recall from lots of conversations we've had that Persia was not a one capital gig. Persia was a very cosmopolitan people. They celebrated their multiculturalism. The kings viewed it as a big flex that they had specific units in their army that had all of the various tactical skills and personalities and even armor and attire and personal presentation of all of these different areas. They were very proud. Xerxes and Darius were very proud to show up in Greece with people from all over the world. Just the way they would array for battle was meant to communicate to their enemies, we're everybody and you're you. What are you doing? Give the symbolic gift of earth and water to the King of Kings, the Achaemenid king of Persia, and bend the knee and become a part of everyone. Well, obviously we know the story. Those feisty Greeks weren't really into it, and those feisty Egyptians, they rolled with it sometimes, and they fought back pretty hard at other times. Not everybody bent the knee, but a lot of people did. And this was a great point of pride for the Persians. This is part of the reason that the Persians had multiple capitals, because those capitals represented the great cities of peoples they had absorbed into their empire. Babylon is sort of a capital. It doesn't count in quite the same administrative way. It's more of the most powerful sub-governmental city from the most powerful region or state or province or satrap that existed within the larger Persian Empire. But then in addition to Babylon, which is kind of a de facto capital as well, you've got Pasargadae, Persepolis, big words but manageable, Susa, and Ecbatana, the ancient capital of the Medes, that all at one time or another serve as temporary capitals, or even capitals that you use depending on the weather. Ecbatana sits at a higher elevation, and so it's kind of nice to get up there to escape the heat during the summer, I think, for some of these Achaemenid kings. This scene is taking place for you and I in the most familiar of the capitals. It's Susa. This is where Esther and Mordecai heroically rescued the Jewish people. This is where Haman prowled about and eventually adorned the skyline of the city with his own body impaled upon his own gallows. This is where Xerxes patrolled the streets in his litter and strode back and forth in his open balconies, admiring the magnificent palace complex his dad had started and that he had improved. And now Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, who came to power in 465 BC after a rough end to his father's life and a disappointing, albeit short, scramble for power that happened after Xerxes' death. This is one of the capitals that Artaxerxes likes to operate out of. We don't know as much about Artaxerxes as we do about Xerxes, so we don't know how much he split time. But the book opens in Susa, and we're told right out of the gate that we're hearing from Nehemiah himself. Nehemiah 1:1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. Here's what we know about Hakaliah. Nothing. I had no idea who that is. I don't know where he's from. I don't know who he's related to. I think the only benefit we get by knowing that name is that we can differentiate this Nehemiah from some other Nehemiahs who come up, because there's a lot of names in the Old Testament. And it says that in the month of Kislev, I think I said that right, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some of the other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. News didn't work back then like it works now. You weren't connected to the whole world. The affairs of far, far away were something that you would mostly learn by rumor or whisper. And if you were lucky, you might get an official report from an eyewitness who had just made the harrowing journey. And it sounds like this Hanani fellow, who's a literal brother probably of Nehemiah, another son of Hakaliah, has been to Jerusalem and he's seen some stuff. What stuff? Well, presumably the stuff that just a page earlier you and I were looking at. He's aware of this gigantic social upheaval, this destabilizing event where the core unit of any society has just been shaken up vigorously as all of these wives and even some children are put away, sent back out to the neighboring tribes from whence they came. And there's got to be a gigantic economic fallout that's coming from all of this as well that Nehemiah is about to hear about. And all of this is happening in a city that is basically unguarded still and certainly unprotected by walls. We'll learn more about exactly what that report in the very cushy citadel of Susa sounds like and how that strikes Nehemiah's ears next time around. I'm going to have Jeff put a whole bunch of links to music that he has made down below. He made a whole album that was based on another podcast that I did, like a limited run, one season podcast called Ironwood Rhino that maybe there'll be a season 2 of someday. And he literally just took the plot of several of those episodes and made this epic album out of it. If you haven't heard it, I think you would really get a kick out of the thing, whether you ever listen to the Ironwood Rhino program or not. And then he just put out an EP here not too long ago that is fantastic as well. Very experimental, very fun. I think you'll get a kick out of that also. So I'll have him leave links there and you can just go and check it out for free on Spotify. And if you enjoy it and you think of it, let him know. The encouragement's always welcome. All right, that's plenty for now. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.